everyone here filling up our space, and to everyone who is joining us from across the country and across the world. Welcome, everybody. At the People's Forum, we are a space for many things, for political education, for culture, for exchange, but our main responsibility is to convene those organizations and people from diverse backgrounds, from many different contexts, who are in struggle, and to create opportunities for us to discuss, debate, and exchange, and with the intention of coming out of those moments with deeper bonds of solidarity and more confidence for the struggle that comes ahead. So it is part of our urgent responsibility to be hosting this convening here today for this very important discussion. Donald Trump's decisive victory in these presidential elections marks the end of one of the most controversial presidential elections that we have ever seen in U.S. history. And it very importantly took place in the context of a devastating economic crisis, and at the same time, a year-long mass movement against the U.S.-Israeli genocidal war against the Palestinian people. And the combination of these conditions has exposed to millions of people the false democracy that is governing the United States today. In an attempt to confront the far-right agenda of the Republican Party, but without losing the sponsorship of their corporate and billionaire supporters, the Democratic Party turned their back on young people in this election campaign. They have turned their back on workers, on immigrants, on women, and they ran on a program that was designed to appeal to the right, essentially paving the way for the very dramatic rightward shift in the American ruling class that we are witnessing now. And so now Trump will enter the White House in January. We know from experiencing his previous administration, from everything that he's stated, and from the agenda of all of those who he has gathered around him, that he will most likely launch a full-scale attack on all of those rights that have been won through mass struggle over the past decades, and on top of it, that he will expand the U.S. war campaign that is raging across the world, leaving devastation and destruction and even genocide in its wake. He will drive forward an agenda that benefits the ultra-rich, without the concessions of the Democratic Party, who is in the same way wedded to the needs of the billionaire class, but he is not fettered by the need to present a veneer of tolerance or equality. We, the workers, the social movements, the immigrant families, the young people, the anti-war movement, the working class as a whole, we are faced with many urgent questions. How will we respond to this change in the correlation of forces today? How will we confront this continual rise of the right? Will we be driven by fear and apathy or pessimism? Will we stay home? Or will we organize our forces and chart our own path forward? Will we follow the lead of the Democratic Party and mourn their loss? Or will we assert that we reject the billionaire agenda no matter which party is executing its orders? These are the burning questions that are on the minds of all thinking people, of all people in struggle, and being discussed all across the country today and in the past few days. What will we do? We are here to discuss what we need to do next, and we have already made one major first step. Just now, organizations representing diverse sections of the working class and progressive movement have already called for a mass mobilization on January 20, which will be the first day of Trump's administration, but more importantly, Martin Luther King Jr.'s day. We will be gathering across the country, and we will show the world, we will show the White House, we will show the billionaires, but more importantly, we will show our people in their billions across the world that we not only insist on defending our rights, but in fact, we are going to expand them. We have our own agenda to push forward, we have our own proposals, and we have an idea and a proposal on how to organize society around the well-being of the majority of humanity across the world. But this movement needs even more than that, and this moment needs even more than that. We need to develop a sharp and accurate analysis of the political realignment that is occurring before us today. And we also need to reach each other. We need to organize ourselves, and we need to organize together. We need to build mass consciousness that understands the urgency of an independent movement that is making not only defensive moves, but proposals for how to go forward and is taking up that cause. So tonight's conversation is one step in initiating many conversations to come. And we've gathered here a very powerful panel of people who represent essential sections of our society and have also behind them an accumulation of political experience that is going to help us navigate what comes next. So it is my honor to introduce to you our panel today. We have former presidential candidate Claudia De La Cruz. We have Jorge Torres from the National Day Laborer Organizing Network and Radio Jornalera. Eugene Puryear of Breakthrough News. Miriam Osman from the Palestinian Youth Movement. And Brian Becker, founding member of the Party for Socialism and Liberation. So thank you all for being here again. Thank you to our amazing speakers. And with that, Claudia, I'd like to invite you to come on up.
How's everyone doing? All right. High morale? High discipline? That's right. So first and foremost, I want to thank folks for making it out here on a Friday night. It speaks volumes, the amount of people that are here, gathered in this space, and the amount of people that are logged on. Thousands of people actually logged on Zoom. It speaks to the commitment of our people to organize a fight back, not to go hide, not to go mourn, but to actually live out in the tradition of those that have come before us, that have built the opportunity for us to be here. And in that same way, we take on the responsibility for future generations. Is that not right? So I want to start with some reflections and experiences with the time that I have. I want to start by calling out our attention to what the Democrats and the liberal wing of the Democrats are doing, which is something that I think everyone who experienced 2016 has some sort of experience with, which is the blaming of poor communities and the scapegoating of working class sectors. They are saying we have to blame black men, that we have to blame Latino men, that we have to blame immigrant communities, that we have to place judgment on those who didn't go out and vote. And it's important for us to remember, and it's important for us to intervene in moments when we hear this narrative saying that it's the spinelessness of the Democratic Party that has brought us here. We have to remind people that it is the incapability of the Democratic Party to accept responsibility and shift course that has brought us here. Trump won because the Democrats are mediocre. Trump won because they are not an opposition to Trump or anyone in the ruling class, and because they have failed and betrayed the working people of this country. So when they turn around and place blame on any sector of the working class, we must be really clear in letting them know that our people are not politically apathetic, that our people are not the ones to blame, that our people will never engage with a type of political system that does not engage with them and does not deliver in their promises. The Democrats have historically enabled the right wing, and they have done so with Trump as well. We saw a campaign where Kamala Harris wanted to be to the right of Trump. That is what we got. And of course, there are hundreds of millions of people who are unwilling to accept that because they know the levels of bullshit that is. While Trump won this election, we cannot pretend that the Democrats have not allowed and conducted attacks against the working class people for decades. If we think about the last 16 years, the Democratic Party had power for 12 of those years. And they didn't do anything, not a single thing, to protect or expand our rights. In fact, they sat back and watched how our rights were placed on a chopping block and said we can't do anything about it. So I ask you, if we have a political party that has the economic and political power to do something and chooses not to do so, are they not the ones to blame for the chaos that we're in? All of this to say that Trump is a symptom. He is the symptom. He is a product of the capitalist system. If we had time, I'd talk about how he is in WWE Hall of Fame. His very character is something that has been developed by the capitalist system. All the hatred, all the vileness, all the most disgusting elements of the capitalist system are expressed in Trump. But he, again, is only a symptom. The actual disease that we must work to destroy is capitalism and U.S. imperialism. We heard, Karina and I, just in terms of reflection, Karina and I went across the country to 64 cities in 13 months. I'm sorry, my brain is not working as fast as it usually works. That's all right, take your time. 64 cities in about 13 months. And we didn't just visit swing states. We visited all types of communities. And it has to do with our socialist politic and our socialist commitment that is a clear opposition to the capitalist system. We heard from communities that were organizing, were resisting, and were struggling. Communities that vouched to continue to do this work despite of whoever won the presidency and became the new tenant to the White House. This is not the attitude of the liberals or the Democrats. That is the attitude of working class people. We went and heard from communities that were organizing around livable wages. Workers of Amazon, fast food restaurants in the South that were denouncing the fact that the minimum wage in this country has not been raised since 2009. And they are expected to live off crumbs in a moment where the prices on essential goods continue to increase. We went to communities that were abandoned by both the Republicans and the Democrats, and they were still making a life in places that seemed like ghost towns. We went to communities that were organizing against police brutality and mass incarceration and the emergence of cop cities all across this country. Understanding that under Democratic charge, the number of people, civilians, unarmed, that were killed by police increased. Over 1,000 people in this country were murdered by police in 2023 under the Democrats. Cop cities emerged under the Democrats. Attacks on unionized and organized labor increased as well. There are cities in the South, there are cities in the Midwest where local politicians and state politicians tell corporations, you get a tax break if you build your companies here. And you know what's better? You don't need to worry about organized labor. That is the type of society, and that is the type of country, and that is the type of democracy that we are living in. And so when we have communities that are organizing and standing on principle, like young people all across this country, organizing in the universities, standing against the administration and standing against police repression in defense of life, in defense of our siblings in Palestine and across the Middle East. And they are willing to take the risk of anything that comes, any backlash, any breaking of their skull by these policemen and women. That tells us the spirit of our people. It shows us the spirit of our struggle. We heard with such huge disgust and anger from communities that have an understanding that we have a responsibility in the belly of the beast to end the U.S. war machine. People who understand that it's inconceivable for the United States of America to have $1 trillion allocated for the military. When the gutting of education, the gutting of healthcare, the closing of clinics is happening. When people cannot afford or access child care. Our people are awake. They know, they feel it in their guts every day. And they're waiting for a glass of clean water. They're waiting for an alternative. They're waiting for orientation. They're waiting for an instrument. And that is not going to stop with Trump. In fact, it's going to become heightened with Trump. And so the question is, will we stand by and watch him unleash his agenda? Will we stand by and watch him unleash all sorts of attacks to historically marginalized communities? Or will we have the spine that the Democrats and the ruling class do not have? People have been in struggle, people have been organizing, people have been mobilizing against attacks on several fronts for many decades. Where we are today, even when we think about the reemergence of the anti-imperialist, anti-war movement in response to the genocide in the Middle East that has extended. It's not only Palestine now. We're talking about Lebanon. We're talking about Yemen. We're talking about they're moving towards Iran. There has been a reemergence of the anti-imperialist struggles that came before us. What will we do? That's the huge question. And I'm very glad to see the amount of people that are in this space, the amount of people that are connected, because that's the response to the question. We're willing to show up. Karina and I saw a lot of folks in struggle, a lot of folks organizing, educating, mobilizing in the smallest spaces and the biggest spaces. And what I think is missing, and what has been missing, and what has been intentionally broken and dismembered by the capitalist system is our ability to build a mass movement. A mass movement that can actually bring all these different sections of struggle together. A mass movement that is centered in working class socialist proposals. I think it's important, to remind and reaffirm what we said in the campaign trail. The real divide is not between the Democrats and the Republicans. In fact, there are one party with two names, as W.E.B. Du Bois said. One party with two names, two factions of the ruling class. The divide is not Trump or Harris. They had the same donors. And my grandmother taught me that whoever pays the bills get to choose and decide what the agenda will be. She said it in another context, but it still makes sense. So we know that that's not the divide. The real divide in this country is the capitalist, the wealthiest minority in society that imposes itself with its hegemony of violence against us, the majority of people in this country. And I want to remind us that there has nothing that we have ever received from the benevolence of the ruling class. We've always had to fight. And if there's something that the Democratic Party has been very effective in doing, is intervening in our ability to build people power. Did you hear that? The Democratic Party has been effective in intervening in our ability to build people power. They have political organization, and they tell us that we don't need it. But they have Congress, they have the Senate, they have the FBI, the CIA, they have all types of PACs. they have the Pentagon, they have philanthropy. You keep going down that list. They are organized. And so I'll bring Malcolm X into the space and say, we are not outnumbered. We are out organized. And for as long as we have the ability to understand what this moment calls for and actually build it, we have all the potential to win. History teaches us that only the people in organized struggle can save the people. The ruling class will never do that for us. They're not meant, they are not placed in positions to do that for us. So when Trump releases his agenda, which is going to be an agenda for the ruling class, we need to be ready. We need to be ready to put forth what our agenda is, what the working class agenda is, and what we are willing to defend and protect and fight for. And the people will mobilize themselves to that proposal. So I want to thank you again for coming here. I look forward to the Q&A. I'm going to go back to drinking coffee because obviously I need it. Thank you all.
Wow, full house. So I come to this space as an organizer, was undocumented for more than 10 years. When I came to this country from Ecuador with my parents, I realized that it was supposed to be for a better life. But what I faced 25 years plus ago was that my parents couldn't find a stable job because we were undocumented, that I couldn't go to college because I didn't have papers, and we have dreams. My brother is still with a DACA, and he's facing probably deportation after these elections. So I've been organizing since then, and now I organize with the National Day Labor Organizing Network, which is a organization across the country that with more than 70 plus worker centers. And what we do is we organize from the bottom up with different type of workers, and especially day laborers, domestic workers, and actually low-income families as well. What we have seen after probably two months ago was that it was a lot of fear, and visiting day labor corners across the country was that people was super scared what was going to happen if Trump wins. After Trump wins, we have couple calls, Zoom calls, and workers actually were scared as a maximum level. And we were thinking, what is that we're going to do? And I remember Pedro, who came into this call, and he was the one who mentioned we need to start organizing for real. We have to stop saying el pueblo salva al pueblo and it's just bullshit. The people save the people and it's just bullshit. It's in the slogan. What is that we're going to do for real? And we were in the middle of a call with almost 100 plus people, and we start thinking about it. How the hell we going to do this? And what does that mean when we say the people save the people, or el pueblo salva al pueblo? And we make a decision that it's about time to organize local communities and comités populares, popular committees across the country. We decide to organize popular assemblies across the country. And then around 1 month, we organize almost 25 assemblies across the country. Now we have, thank you. And now we have almost 45 plus committees, leading by workers, leading by undocumented people, leading by people that really are the directly impacted, and they're ready to work. We're working also closely with MST in Brazil, and we are also preparing to do political education and among of other things. But with that said, what does this mean about creating popular committees? And what we want to do with this is creating committees in different localities with different issues of people that are really are facing this injustice system and that are facing things like deportation and detention. What they are proposing with Project 2025 is basically 4 things. Number 1, terminating all the deferred actions. TPS, DACA, DALE, which is a deferred action for labor enforcement. They want to terminate also any type of naturalization of undocumented people, which is like when you marry with someone that is undocumented and you have a baby, they want to terminate that naturalization as well, which is stupid. And Stephen Mueller just posted something today that he's going to do that in a turbo fast manner the first 100 days. When Trump says that he's going to deport more than 11 million undocumented immigrants, he's not playing. He's really going to go against it. The second thing that they want to do is create local communities and local programs like 287Gs or secure communities that allows local police to be acting as immigration agents. The other thing that they want to do is, this is something that is really going to affect a lot of workers. They want to amplify E-Verify, which is it is a system they're going to detect you when you go to work. They're going to detect you if you have papers or not, if you're undocumented or not. So that means that a lot of people that are already working with the way that you have to be able to work, they're going to be deported or they're going to be detained. They want to also implement almost 100,000 beds every day on the detention centers. And that's going to happen just if you create inhumane laws and with local communities and local police in local communities, right? So what we are trying to do is that proposal is basically creating local committees, comités populares, which is what we call in Spanish, comités populares or popular committees that organize by themselves, that they have their own way and they want to think about what is that we're going to do, and they choose, and organizing workers, they choose where we're going and themselves and by themselves, and no one is going to tell them what to do. I think that most of the committees has lost the belief and the hope in the Democratic Party or in the Republican Party. I think by now it is time to organize, and we just have us and we don't have no one else. Thank you so much.
Well, good evening, everybody. Hopefully people can hear. You can hear in the back? Okay, you just got to make sure. How y'all feeling, all right? You know, there's a lot of things I think we've all been thinking about. But one of the things I used to often say before the election to people about the rhetoric, let me actually get this water, just in case. The rhetoric of Kamala Harris's campaign, it was always, we won't go back, we won't go back, we won't go back. And, fine, we certainly don't want to go back from the things that we've won, oppressed people, working class people. But so much of what that discourse left out, I think, speaks to a large degree to why they lost. Because you keep talking about what we might lose, but never about how we got it in the first place. And in fact, you'd think that everything that had ever come from civil rights to women's rights to labor rights was just handed down on high from some politician. That people were just sitting around somewhere in squalor and oppression and exploitation, had no idea what to do, no organization, nothing at all. And then all of a sudden, some benevolent politician came and ran a campaign funded by rich people and gave poor people things that they really wanted. And then they were thankful and grateful for it for the rest of their lives. that that's how change happens, that it was Lyndon Johnson, not Martin Luther King, that it was FDR, not the sit-down strikes, that it was Abraham Lincoln, not the slaves who rebelled. So the number one question we have to ask ourselves, people say, what is to be done, is what will we do collectively? You know, many people talk a lot about Frederick Douglass. If there's no struggle, there's no progress. Good speech. Same speech, one of the things he said, and I thought it was interesting, find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them. So Trump has many plans, and we can talk about his plans. We will talk about his plans. But he can really, truly only implement all of his plans if we decide to let him. You know, I mentioned Frederick Douglass in that speech, not by accident. You know, it was a speech that was given in 1857. So not that long before the Civil War, at the height of the struggle against slavery. And you know, at that time, there was something called the Fugitive Slave Act. Bipartisan law, by the way, was passed. And it said that any slave that ran away could be taken back to their master anywhere in the country. And that a slave master could hire a bounty hunter to go anywhere at any time and bring them back. And not only were they bringing fugitive slaves back, they were oftentimes targeting abolitionists to sell them into slavery. There was no legal recourse. This was the law, the federal law. If you were a slave and you escaped, they could come get you and take you back. You had no legal case to make. But millions of people all across the northern and western parts of the United States at that time decided that they couldn't live like that. They couldn't live with that. Whether or not the law said one thing, there was a higher law, that they had to fight against slavery no matter what the risk. So they formed things called vigilance committees all across the country that said that when a fugitive slave is brought before the bar into the courthouse, we will go to the courthouse and we will physically resist the imposition of returning them back. That we will physically remove them from the courthouse if we have to and put them on the Underground Railroad and send them to Canada. And maybe we won't succeed. Maybe we'll be beaten. In many cases, these were serious tussles. People were pulling out guns. Maybe we'll even be killed. But we would rather risk our lives than allow our formerly enslaved brothers and sisters to just be taken back like we never said anything or like we don't care. And this became a sensation all across the country. And in many cities, like Springfield, Massachusetts, where the Vigilance Committee was formed by a guy named John Brown, once they formed it, not one slave was ever taken out of there ever again. So before I make some more remarks, I have to say I'm so honored to have the opportunity to speak after our brother Jorge and the work that Indalon is doing, because we have seen Trump reaffirm his situation yesterday on NBC News. He said, we're going to do mass deportations. Well, you think for every one of the 12 to 15 million undocumented people, if that's the number, many of us have friends, family members, co-workers who are undocumented. So that's tens of millions of more people. So you can say it's scary, and it is scary. You can say it's odious, it is odious. But when they start bringing the trucks around to round people up, you can also say, I'm going to step outside of my door, and I'm going to link arm with my neighbors, and if you're going to throw them out, you better throw me out with them, because we're standing together no matter what. So my basic message is, don't give up what you got for nothing. Just because the Democrats didn't do anything, just because Kamala didn't win, doesn't mean that we can't do anything and that we can't win. I'll just say a few more things and I'll get out your way. You know, we also have to note, and thank you, Claudia, for laying this out, I think, well. You know, the whole idea that this is democracy versus authoritarianism, Democrats or Republicans. That's not what it is. What it is capitalism versus the survival of humanity. The Trump agenda is an ultra-capitalist smash and grab raid on everyday people's lives. I mean, you look at this election. 150 billionaire families spent about $2 billion on the election. The top 10 of those 150, 8 of them were Trump supporters. Some of them were giving over $100 million. Now, do you think they were giving that money out of the goodness of their heart? No, they obviously were not. They're expecting something. And that something is a lot of money, because they know that Trump has already promised to give them hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in tax cuts. That's both corporate and personal. So you're getting more profit from the business, and you're taking more of that money home at the expense of average everyday people and those programs. He's saying, well, we're going to have no taxes on overtime. Certainly sounds good, but what he is not telling you is that the plan of all his friends is actually to make you get paid less money in overtime. That's actually Trump's plan, is to reduce the amount of money you can get paid in overtime. So he's saying no tax on the overtime because he knows it won't matter because you're making less money anyway. Every regulation you could think of, he's like, we will get rid of that regulation. Of course, the climate crisis is the number we know, drill, baby, drill. But every union thing, I mean, listen, the Supreme Court is already doing Project 2025. They might get rid of a lot of the union protections anyway. But what they don't get rid of, Trump is going to come for that too. Environmental protections, labor protections. I mean, anything you could think of, from making sure someone doesn't die from heat stroke on the job to slipping and falling, like they're going to try to get rid of all of that. So for business people, this is fantastic. This is the best case scenario. And of course it's the best case scenario. This is why they need Trump. Because at the end of the day, as the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King said over 40 years ago, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. At an increasing degree, even if people don't have the right name or nomenclature or ideological box to put it in, people can see something is very wrong. That in the richest country in the history of countries, how is it that people are sleeping outside, don't have a roof over their head, going to bed hungry? The mainstream media, which claims to tell you things, amazingly to me, never looks at data being collected by the U.S. Census Bureau, not Eugene Puryear, the U.S. Census Bureau, saying that 155 million people in this country are having at least a little trouble making their ends meet week to week, not month to month, week to week, not paycheck to paycheck, week to week. That 21 million people are going hungry at least sometime, week to week. They say socialism is bad because you got a ration card. In capitalism, paycheck is your ration card. And a lot of people are on starvation rations. So when you look at the situation that we are in, people are rising up. Ferguson, Baltimore, Minneapolis, the UAW, the Teamsters. I mean, everywhere you look, the labor movement, the streets, the climate movement, Standing Rock, Line 3. Like I could probably stand here and list 100 things that have been happening where people who are exploited and oppressed have been standing up in powerful ways that have shocked and electrified the world. So in that context, the very rich understand that they can actually not really convince that many people that somehow the agenda of the billionaires is really the agenda of us, of average people. So there's only one thing they can try to do, and that is to impose it on us with the most authoritarian police state, whatever you want to call it, that they can put together and get into the office, and that's Trump. So this is the agenda of the ultra-rich, to impose upon you the destruction of your life, your livelihood, and the planet that we all live on, all for their own short-term gain. And they don't care. It's like, what's the Matt Damon movie, Elysium, where all the rich people go into space? Well, Elon Musk is saying, let's go to space. And he's the number one richest person in America and a big Trump donor. So they already planning. It's not just Hollywood. They're saying we're going to destroy the earth. We're going to destroy your life. We're going to use AI to put you out of work. And then when you get so mad that we can't stop you from rising up and killing us all, we're just going to go to space and control you with robots down here. I mean, it sounds wild, but this is like what they're actually planning. This is why it's 36 cop cities. This is why there's critical infrastructure laws in every state saying you can't protest pipelines. This is why you have RICO charges on activists, because they know they're not going to do anything to solve people's basic problems, that more and more people are waking up to what's going on, that people are getting increasingly organized and increasingly militant and bold and willing to fight back. So they have to find some way to try to beat you to death over the head to stop you, because they know at this point you see that the game is up. So the question in front of us is, what are we going to do? Are we going to be as bold as the abolitionists? I hope so. Are we going to recognize that so much of what's put it up, you spent the whole thing leading up to the election, all these people, don't vote for a third party, don't do this, don't do that, support Democrats, you're wasting money, you're wasting this. I don't even want to get into it. You remember it. They said the same thing then. In the 1840s and the 1850s, when people started stepping out against slavery, people said, you're crazy. Why would you do this? If you don't support the two major parties, you're setting us back. Blah, blah, blah. I mean, they were the most hated, hunted, rebuked, scorned, prices on their heads, killed, murdered, jailed people out there. Now everyone will turn around and say, oh, we love them, and it's great, and we'll name a street, and we'll put up a statue, and I'll dedicate a building at a college. But they don't want to talk about the fact that at a certain point, they were considered the outcasts of society. So we do have to move from the margins to the center. We're not that weak, but I know we're not as powerful as we'd like to be. But there's no way to get from point A to point B until we actually set up a political North Star of who we are, what we want to be, and where we want this country and this world to go. I'm wrapping up now. Once you have an agenda and a plan, you can win, but you can't win without organization. So I personally am wary, because we have to be serious, real, and clear-eyed. But I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful at this room. I'm hopeful at the thousands of people online. I'm hopeful at the millions of people who have already been in struggle over the past 12 months. I'm hopeful that if we can get organized in a way that we haven't been organized yet before, we will be able to destroy the entrenched power structures that are taking us down, destroying our people, and destroying our planet. So that's what is to be done. That's what's next. And I look forward to being in the fight with you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Eugene. It's always hard to go after Eugene. But thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you all tonight. As has been made clear on this panel by everybody, the Democrats have no one to blame but themselves for Trump's victory. And their position on Palestine, their refusal to end the genocide, played a major role in their failure. For over a year, this genocide has continued, and it's been funded by a Democratic administration, by the Biden-Harris administration. And for over a year, our movement for Palestine has mobilized millions, literally millions in this country, week after week, into the streets, demanding an end to the genocide, demanding an arms embargo, demanding an end to the Israeli occupation. And all year, we've also chanted, "In November, we'll remember." We chanted that and we meant it. And why did we chant that? It's not because we were under any illusions that we could appeal to the consciousness of the Democratic Party or that the Democrats are somehow our friends. We chant that because we know that when we mobilize and that when we unite in our demands and our promises, we demonstrate our power. And that's what makes the ruling class really afraid. So for over a year, our movement has been doing the long-term work of transforming consciousness and building political power. Let's remember again that the Biden administration had every opportunity to end this genocide. It's their position, not ours, that's entirely unreasonable. The solutions are right there within their grasp. They have the ability to implement them, but they refuse. They don't have the will to do so. And rather than respond to our demands, They chose to move the Democratic Party further and further to the right, and in the process, they lost themselves the election. That's what happened. What we need to be clear about is that it's actually a very simple thing that we're demanding. An arms embargo is a reasonable and simple policy. Instead of seeing how reasonable this is, the Democrats showed the people of the United States who they are really accountable to. This has been made clear to millions across the country now. And what's been made clear to us who've been fighting in the streets for Palestine is that the White House, the weapons manufacturers, they have a shared objective. They have a shared objective. It's not that one is controlling the other. And that objective is 100% against the interests of the Palestinian people. It's 100% against the interests of the working class in the United States. And the interests and objectives of the White House, whether under a Democratic or Republican administration, it doesn't matter. The interests and objectives of the weapons manufacturers, they are the interests of the ruling class. And the ruling class's objective, what has been made clear this entire year, is that their objective is to profit from dominating the world economy. So to put it another way, what this movement has clarified for millions of people is that the project of the entire US ruling class is the project of US imperialism. It's that simple. It's about dominating the entire world economy for the interests of the capitalist class. And I mean the entire capitalist class, not just the weapons manufacturers. So that's what we're up against. And this clarity about what we're up against is what we mean when we say that a key achievement of our movement for Palestine has been the development of a mass anti-imperialist consciousness in the United States. And it's also been the training of thousands of anti-imperialist organizers who've been transformed through this struggle. And for people whose consciousness has been transformed, for all of us in this room, there's no turning back. There's no going back from that. Now, the occupation of Palestine has been ongoing for over 100 years. And the movement for Palestine has been growing all that time, both in Palestine and in the diaspora. And slowly, the world has been waking up to that reality over the course of history. But what happened last year is that Palestine was propelled onto the international stage in a way that we've never seen before. And what our movement has been able to do under those conditions is through organized and united efforts with strong leadership in the movement, has been to respond to that by turning what used to be a minority position in this country into the position of the majority. Support for Palestine is now a majority position in this country. Millions of people in this country correctly identify this as a US genocide. And the outrage that organically brought millions into the streets has been transformed over the course of a year by our movement. And we can't take this transformation for granted. We can't take for granted that people would develop anti-imperialist consciousness from this struggle. That doesn't happen by itself. Again, it took a movement. It takes leadership. It takes unity. And it takes political clarity. And that's what we've been able to provide. And the reality is that our intervention, it makes so much sense because it's just common sense. People are receptive to it. It speaks to the political reality in this country, which is that 69% of people want a new system. They want a new economic system. 67% of people, of all voters, whether Democrat or Republican, wanted a ceasefire. So again, it's more than reasonable to want to stop a genocide. It's more than reasonable to want to meet the needs of people in this country. And it's more than reasonable to want to prioritize people over profit. These are reasonable demands. this growing and now irreversible anti-imperialist consciousness, which is, again, a critical achievement of our movement, is going to be the basis of our united efforts moving forward. And our movement has also created clarity around two other things, and they can't be separated from the issues that have been on people's minds over the course of this election season. The first is that our movement has shattered any illusions that people might have had that we live in an actual democracy. People don't believe this anymore. Rightfully so. And what's a good example that we can point to this? The majority of Americans don't want war. The majority of Americans want to end the genocide in Palestine. There's polls that show this. 61% of Americans want an arms embargo. That's almost 2/3 of the country. That's a massive amount. So if public opinion has no impact on the foreign policy of the United States, how can we call this a democracy? That's what our movement has been able to show, and what people have so clearly been showing by showing up in the streets week after week. The second thing that our movement has really built clarity around is that the US war machine is not just a war on the Palestinian people. It's not just a war of people abroad, or on people abroad that feel far away. It's a war on working class people here in the United States. And Claudia talked about this so clearly, about the fact that the issue on most people's minds in this election was how to make ends meet, all across the country. So to give an example of this, in 2019, US schools collected $5.6 billion from students for school lunch. This is ridiculous. Why do kids have to pay for lunch? And not just that, not only do kids have to pay for lunch, kids and families, but also 30 million kids can't even afford school lunch. They go hungry. While this is happening, the price of a single US aircraft carrier that was recently sent to the Middle East, the price of this aircraft carrier, let me get this right, was $6.8 billion. One aircraft carrier. More than enough to pay for everyone's school lunch. How is this justifiable? The answer is that it's not. What is clear is that we live in a country that is so committed to the ruling class's project of imperialism that it will let Americans go hungry. It will let Americans go off to endless wars and die. And it will let people in Gaza burn alive. And then they'll have the audacity to turn around and try to defend this system. That's what has become clear. Our movement has built a consciousness that connects concretely the foreign policy of the United States to our domestic policy. And again, this is the consciousness that's going to allow us to build a united front under Trump and is going to be the basis of our power. So Jorge and Eugene spoke a little about what we can expect from Trump's policy domestically. I want to talk a little bit about what we can expect in terms of foreign policy. What we can expect is a continuation of US war crimes. That's the simple way of putting it. Trump has made it clear in the media that he's giving Netanyahu a green light to do whatever he wants. He's told him that he should, quote, get the job done in Gaza. Get the job done, meaning to continue the genocide. When it comes to Iran, to Yemen, to Iraq, to Israeli escalation generally in the region, it's highly unlikely that Trump is going to push for any kind of restraint, no matter how superficial it is, like what we've seen under the Biden administration. We are the ones that are going to have to force that restraint. And organizing is how we're going to do it. Organizing is how we're going to build our power. And how we organize, how we bring more and more people into our struggle is going to be the deciding factor moving forward. We have to continue to develop the mechanisms and the organizations that are capable of long-term struggle, because we know that this is going to be a long fight. We have to continue to build this movement that has provided people with so much political clarity. The movement that's been able to identify for people that this is a fundamentally undemocratic system, a system built for the ruling class, not for the people. And our task is to draw more and more people into our struggle against this shared enemy. The shared enemy of the Palestinian people, the shared enemy of the working people of the world, and the shared enemy of working people in the United States. Our task is to build power. Our task is to unify our efforts, because this is the only thing that's going to give us the force to transform this system. So when millions of people are feeling like the world is on the brink of collapse, when millions feel like no one in power is doing the right thing, or anything that makes sense, really, what has happened this year is that they've found a home in our movement. They've come out to the streets. They've flyered every inch of their neighborhoods. They've come to weekly volunteer meetings, reorganized their schedules, and they've joined organizations. And if you're listening to this and you haven't done so yet, if you're listening to this because you feel uncertain about the future, then we invite you to join us. It's imperative that you join us, because this fight is going to take all of us together. Thank you.
Very excellent speakers and presentations on a range of issues. And I think the reason there's so many people in this room, and the reason there are thousands of people online right now, is everyone has a great sense, I think, that we are approaching an epic moment. Perhaps an epic struggle, the outcome of which will determine the fate of the country, and perhaps the fate of the world, and the fate of our future. And I think when we look at what happened in the election and the outcome, and the impact it has on progressive people, and I think it's probably true for everyone who's in this room, there is a sense of great foreboding that the most right-wing element in the ruling class, the most dangerous force within the U.S. capitalist imperialist establishment, has taken the reins of power. And you might have said in 2016, Donald Trump is an anomaly. It's a weird sort of idiosyncratic development. Like, who would have possibly expected Donald Trump to become president of the United States? But here we are 8 years later, and not only did Trump win, Trump won the popular vote. He not only won the Electoral College, he won the popular vote. And it wasn't just Trump. The Republicans took the Senate. They have the House of Representatives. They have a unified government under the leadership of the Republican Party, which is now Donald Trump's party. So you cannot say at this point in 2024 that we've encountered some freakish, weird anomaly. That's not true. And I think that we have to deeply appreciate what's happened. Now, it's not that Donald Trump's electoral vote, his popular vote, went up from 2020. It's about the same. It's about 74 million or so. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden got 81 million votes. Donald Trump has won the popular vote by a significant margin because the votes for the Democratic Party candidate have gone down by about 14 million. That's a profound difference. So when we talk about the fact that the Democratic Party has nobody to blame but itself, that's on a surface level obviously true. When Biden came into office in 2020, and let's face it, the only reason people voted for Joe Biden was that his name was not Donald Trump. Nobody could look at Joe Biden and say, yeah, that's the guy I want to lead the country. That's not what motivated people. It's that he was not Donald Trump. That was his sole calling card. But he not only won the White House with a very significant margin, 7 million more votes than Trump, but the Democrats had the House of Representatives and they had the Senate. They could do, in fact, whatever they wanted to do because they controlled both branches of the legislative part of the government and the White House, the executive branch. They could do whatever they wanted to do. So let's assume they did do whatever they wanted to do. What did they do? They provoked a war, an unnecessary war with Russia that's taking place in Ukraine. They carried out the genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza. Netanyahu didn't make them do it. He didn't make them send 2,000-pound bombs that the Biden-Harris Blinken administration knew were being dropped on 10 cities, dropped on people as they lined up for food. Netanyahu didn't make them do it. They wanted to do it. They did it because they want Israel to win the war against the resistance in the Middle East. That was their decision. They said they were going to provide economic relief for working class people. Well, what did Biden-Harris do? They withdrew the COVID relief programs like the $300 per child, per family that started during COVID. Now, according to the U.S. government's own statistics, that one decision to send $300 per child into each family reduced childhood poverty in the United States by 50%. In a year. 1 out of 5 children lives in poverty, and the poverty numbers are ridiculous. You could triple the poverty level numbers and you'd still be in poverty. So they withdrew this program and they doubled childhood poverty. That meant it was a policy choice to make kids poor, to make it hard for them to eat. They didn't have to do it. They did it because they wanted to do it. Nobody made them do it. They ended the moratorium on evictions. Nobody made them do it. The only person from the whole U.S. Congress, 435 members of these opportunist politicians who could have stood up and said something about the moratorium on evictions, only Cori Bush. Only Cori Bush stood up and she did a hunger strike at the Capitol building by herself and some of us who joined her. And they took away the moratorium on evictions, and there was a flood of evictions. They could do whatever they wanted to do. You know, when Donald Trump was president, and George Floyd was killed, on May 25th, 2020, Minneapolis went into rebellion. Tim Walz was the governor of Minnesota. On June 1st, you'll all remember that sort of moment where Donald Trump came across Lafayette Park. They violently dispersed those of us who were out in the streets, and I'd say we collectively were out in the streets during those days. They pepper sprayed people. They used so-called non-lethal or less than lethal weapons so that Trump could go across Lafayette Park and stand in front of St. John's Church and hold the Bible. That was right after a conference call with the governors, including Tim Walz, and Trump praised Tim Walz for doing what Trump insisted should be done, which is to use maximum force against people protesting against the murder of George Floyd. That was an audio tape that the Democrats were proud of 1 month ago when it was released, because they said, Donald Trump says that Tim Walz is a far-left communist, but this proves that Tim Walz is not, because Donald Trump was praising him for using police violence against protesters in Minneapolis the 5 days after George Floyd was killed. The Democrats were proud of it. So what happened after Trump had this conference call and told all the governors who were nodding and going along, let's make the cities of America the new battlefield? He said, we're going to dominate the battlefield. And the battlefield was the cities and towns of the United States, and he wanted to invoke the Insurrection Act. We all know this because we were all of us are old enough, I think, to know that that's what actually happened 4 years ago. And what happened when Trump did that? 35 million people in the United States went into the streets in the biggest nationwide uprising against racism in American history. The Democrats were going along with Trump, including Muriel Bowser in D.C., a Democratic mayor. They were imposing the curfews. They were sending the cops against the people. But the people, instead of being afraid, people were afraid at first. When you were getting hit with tear gas after tear gas after tear gas, people ran. Then they started running a little more slowly. And then they started picking up the tear gas and throwing it back at the pigs. They got braver and braver. That's what happened. And that was a rebellion led by black working class young people. That's who led that nationwide rebellion. And there were white people there, and Latino people, and Asian people, and Arab Americans. It was a massive rainbow coalition of resistance led really by a section of the African American working class community that took matters into their own hands. That's what actually happened. And then you could see, like, the Pentagon started renaming military bases. They started taking down statues. The NFL, the billionaire, said, yeah, let's all take a knee. Like, all of these reactionary racists, moribund racists were like, no, we're with the movement. What changed was not the Democrats. It was the uprising of the people. Like, let's learn this lesson. Right now, I think a lot of people are, one, demoralized and scared and fearing that we've entered into a new political realignment because Trump won the popular vote, didn't sneak in, and the Republicans control both houses. Well, people have a right to be nervous. They have a right to be scared. If you're listening to our brothers and sisters from the immigrant communities who say that they're scared, well, of course they're scared. Trump is promising to destroy their communities and their families. This is an epic moment. There is a political realignment going on. It's consummated. This election consummates it. Just like Reagan was a political realignment in the country, the election of Reagan. Reagan's election was, in a way, the end of the 1960s, an end of the progressive era, the beginning of the fight back by the bourgeoisie that said, we're going to stop the communist winning streak, we're going to roll back civil rights, we're going to roll back women's rights, we're going to push gay people back into the closet. That was the Reagan era. And it was a political realignment. Kamala Harris ran in 2024 as a Reagan Democrat. I mean, she was on the podium with Liz Cheney. 20 years ago, all the Democrats said, Dick Cheney, he's the worst monster in the world. Only second place to George W. Bush. Now the Democrats and Kamala Harris are campaigning with Dick Cheney, with Liz Cheney. George W. Bush, because his name is not Donald Trump, his approval ratings among Democrats has gone to 54%. The Democrats have adopted the party of Reagan. In fact, they criticized Trump for taking the Republicans away from being the party of Reagan. So, guess what? The people in the United States do not look at a Reagan Democratic Party as a genuine alternative to the ultra-rightism of Donald Trump. That's not an alternative. So what are we going to do? Our slogan says, what is to be done? Of course, that's from Lenin. And Lenin was, what is to be done meant, let's build an organization. Let's build a party or parties. Let's get organized. The what is to be done was written in 1902, and it was helping the working class and the poor in Russia to get organized. In that sense, that's what we should be doing. But there's another side to the question of what is to be done. And that is, what is to not be done? What do we don't want to do? What don't we want to do? What is not to be done? I would say let's learn the lesson of the first Trump administration. When Trump came into office, so many people went to the airports because he said we're going to ban Muslims from coming into the country. Massive protests. On Inauguration Day, we outnumbered Trump supporters. There were so many protests. This was the anti-Trump resistance. But what happened? The Democratic Party completely co-opted that movement, completely took over that movement, because they said you have to resist Trump, the person, which meant the best and practical way to do it is to get rid of Trump by electing the Democrats. And this very profound activist movement that began as soon as Trump was elected in 2016 simply became a spectator sport where people were cheering on the Democratic Party as it tried to impeach Trump, tried to do lobbying, used all of its nonprofit organizations with single-issue protests, which were completely meaningless. So all of this activism in resistance ended up as being simply a tail to the kite of the Democratic Party. And as we've said, as all of the speakers have said, the problem isn't just Trump. The problem is the capitalist system. And the ruling class parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, are not in opposition to capitalism. They are the voice of capitalism. We get a choice every 2 or 4 years to vote for a variety of carefully vetted imperialist politicians and think that that's democracy. You get to vote every 2 or 4 years for who's going to oppress you for the next 2 or 4 years. That's the beauty of American democracy, is there's this variety. Well, it's not enough. You're not going to win over working class people. North Carolina voted for Trump. Well, go to Asheville, North Carolina. So many families have been destroyed by Hurricane Helene and then Milton. So many people are living, they don't have flood insurance, they don't have wind insurance, they can't rebuild their homes. What did the Biden-Harris administration actually do for them? Nothing. Instead, it sent 2,000-pound bombs to destroy the people in Gaza, sent $60 billion for nonstop war against Russia, using Ukrainians as just part of a meat grinder war. Like the people in North Carolina, when they hear Biden and Harris say, oh, Trump is going to undermine NATO, the people in Asheville, North Carolina, who cannot put their homes back together again, don't care about that. That's not appealing. This imperialist messaging from the Democrats completely antagonizes and alienates big sections of the proletariat, big sections of the working class, big sections of young people. That's why there's 14 million fewer votes for the Democrats this time than there was in 2020. It's not because the country has become so right-wing. The political realignment is not because the masses of people have become revanchist, reactionary, terrible, racist, misogynist pigs. Many are, but that's not the majority. That's not the real problem. The problem is the ruling class has become so far right. The ruling class has become so far right. And their real goal and Trump's real goal, and the Democrats won't tell the truth about this, is Trump and the billionaires who are coming in intend to roll back every gain from the 60s, the civil rights movement, the women's movement, and before that, the labor movement. They want to carry out a counter-revolution and go back to naked, pure capitalism where only capital matters, where only profit matters, and they want to get rid of all of these reforms. They never wanted them in the first place, and now they think that they can do it. The Democrats are not going to stand up and fight. So we're in an epic battle, brothers and sisters. It's epic. What happens now, what we do now, will make all the difference. If Trump goes unopposed, if the Trump program goes through, if the civil rights movement reforms are rolled back, if regulations that are trying to mitigate climate catastrophe are ended, and that's their goal, if they're going to put people, gay people, women, trans people into a closet, demonize them, criminalize them, if we do nothing, that's what's going to happen. It's that simple. Let's not pretend this isn't serious. This is very serious. We either fight and fight effectively and win, or this is going to be a terrible counter-revolutionary assault against the people. We have to be serious, not glib. We have to be super serious. But we cannot simply be activists. We learned the lesson of 2016. If you're just an activist, you just want to be against Trump, you just want to protest against Trump, you're going to end up as a tail to the kite of the Democratic Party. So we have to build organizations everywhere, in every city, every town, like the immigrant sisters and brothers are doing, committees. I'm in the Party for Socialism and Liberation. Thousands of people have applied to join our party in the last 3 days. I'm literally thousands. But, and we want thousands more to join. But my point is, people are looking for organization now. They might look to PSL, but they're going to look to other organizations. We have December 12th comrades here. We have Damian here. We have so many people's organizations. You don't have to wait for somebody to call you and say, do you want to join a group? Form an organization. You can do it in every, like Eugene said, you know, undocumented friends, form a group, form a collective. We can build this movement if all of us become self-acting people. And if we understand that we're not simply going to be activists, we're going to be in the streets and organizing, but we're going to provide a political program that can reach the people in Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to get a political program that can reach the people in the inner cities around the country. We're going to have a political program that can go to all of the so-called Rust Belt cities that have been hollowed out and decimated by the policies of the Republicans and the Democrats. We have to have a program to reach the masses. We can't stop the ruling class, but the organized people can stop the ruling class. That's our job. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you again to our amazing panel. Let's have one more round of applause for all the speakers. So we want to hear from all of you now. And of course, we wish we could hear from every single person. And this is just the beginning of the conversation. So we will take a few comments and questions. I have two comrades, one on each side of the room, who will bring you a mic. But let me first just see hands of those who would like to make a question or a comment. And I'll ask so that we can have enough time for everybody that we keep them at 1 to 2 minutes. So let's start right here.
Is it okay if I hold it? Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Ria, and I'm with Damayan. We serve and organize Filipino migrant workers, including domestic workers and labor trafficking survivors. So we do not have to guess what will happen to the immigrant community during Trump's administration because we organized, during those times. So we experienced ICE raids in the workplace. We had community members who worked graveyard shifts in 7-Eleven and came out in handcuffs with chains tied to their waist. We had members who experienced ICE raids in their apartment buildings, their neighbors jumping from their apartment windows, or a community member who hid in their closet during the raid. We had community members who were picked up in Greyhound buses and detained upstate. We had members who worked and lived with their employer and would not go home because they were afraid to travel. We had labor trafficking survivor members who were trafficked by diplomats and being tracked for deportation because the USCIS denied their T visa applications. So of course we were scared, but if you're backed up against the wall, there's no other choice but to fight back. And then we started getting called brave, but we're also not brave. We just did what we had to do to protect our families and our communities. So we had plenty of lessons during that time. One is that organizing literally saves lives. I have sat in immigration court hearings and watched our member challenge his deportation case in front of a judge and ICE attorney. We have been on the phone with a worker as he ran and hid from ICE. We have been on the phone with a worker while they were being detained upstate. We have been outside of a member's apartment as they barricaded their door during a police raid in their building. Our members were able to escape ICE and police raids, stand in front of immigration judges, and win their trafficking cases because of the organizing that we did as a community. But at the same time, it's not enough to provide critical services. It has to be fused with educating, organizing, and mobilizing. We have to do political education, and that's why we're here. And we will be here until, this term, his term ends, and even after the next term, after Trump. And we will be there too on January 20, Washington, D.C., standing with everyone and all of you.
Thank you so much. I saw another hand on the side here.
Hi, thanks very much. I have a request more than anything. Given that everyone understands how the US runs and it's a false democracy as much of the world, can we reconsider the use of the term Middle East? Because we have to ask ourselves, Middle East of what? I think it would be better to refer it to West Asia or Swana or Levant. I think the idea we want to decentralize away from the historic seat of imperialist power, which is the UK. I think language matters in that regard. That was really it.
Thank you. All right, I have a hand right here.
Hi, my name is Brandon, and I was just wondering about keeping liberals who are now disillusioned with the failure that is the Democratic Party actually disillusioned with it and to break from it. I'm sure many of us have liberals in our lives who are disgusted with how Trump is still so prevalent and there's no institution that can counter him. How do we tell these people in our lives there is no hope for a Democratic Party and we have to constitute a new left organization for the working class?
Thank you. All right, let's take two more. I have 1 and 2 here in the front.
Okay. Hello. Well, good evening. I join you guys to the Pamela. So I remember that we have a COVID lockdowns and for the past 6 months that we couldn't get the vaccine until the end of 2020, going into 2021. So we've been fighting against climate crisis over the decade. So I was wondering, are we going to be able to fight back in the next 4 years until his Trump terms ends in 2028?
Thank you.
This is just sorry. Okay, can I hold it? Okay, sorry. This is just like a more general question concerning organizing people to resist, and not just when our rights are being pushed back, but also against pre-existing laws, and create power that is not just within, or I guess relegated to the community, but rather based in economic structures and materialism. For example, New York State infamously has tailored laws that prevent public servant and state employees, including union employees, for example, to strike. And so, given the efficiency of strikes historically, and labor strikes and economic strikes and tax withdrawal, or not withdrawal, but whatever, strikes, I guess. What are the necessary steps to be able to build a base and a network and a system people can fall back on while engaging and mobilizing for economic and labor strikes that are not temporary or until an agreement is met, but are effective in the long run?
Thank you. All right, thank you so much for these questions. I'm going to pass it back to our panelists. Please come on up and you can respond.
I feel like I'm getting set up, but that's all right. Listen, I appreciate all the questions, and some of the answers are already implied in the question. In terms of how do we talk to liberals, and I think just like that, right? I mean, it's the thing is people's consciousness is not linear, and people hold a lot of contradictory ideas in their head all the time. And it's been said many times that people tend to be convinced primarily not really by what you say to them, but things that happen to them. So repetition is key and critical. Consistency is key and critical. Because a lot of times you feel like you're the only voice in the room. You might, in fact, be the only voice in the room. But the fact that you're consistently that voice, when something happens, it's like, Brandon was telling me this whole time. He was right the whole time. The last year I was in college, was when the economic collapse happened in 2008. And I had a friend who I had been telling him for the past 3 years, capitalism, it's going to be a collapse. Something's going to happen. It's going to go down. I'm a Marxist, so you predict 9 out of 10 of the past economic collapses. Like, you're always saying it. But I remember he called me the day after Lehman Brothers went down. He was like, you were right. You were right the whole time. And, most of the time I'm thinking he's not listening to me. So you never really know who is actually, like, what people are taking from what you say. We have to use as many different arguments as we can. We have to, I think, help walk people through the history. I mean, the biggest example I would say, I think that we can lay out there, well, you could go back further than this, but let's just start in 1980. Starting then, they're telling people vote for the lesser of two evils. Back then, people were saying, well, Reagan was like a fascist. Now you got the Democrats saying, I'm just like Reagan. So if voting for lesser of two evils was actually going to stop the country from moving further to the right, how are we in one of the most right-wing scenarios of the past 40 years with a WWE Hall of Famer getting ready to go back into the presidency for the second time to try to do mass deportations, destroy overtime, destroy minimum wages, and all unions? Like, if voting for lesser of two evils actually worked, you're talking about Project 2025, what about Project 1994? What about the crime bill? What about welfare, so-called welfare reform? What about the original Clinton policy that said drive people into the desert and kill them when they cross the border? Like, this is what happened over the historical continuum of when they said the lesser of two evils was working. So just off the rip, we have to put the ball in the other court. Because it's always said to us, why are you not conforming? But what is the evidence that this confirmation of conforming to the Democratic Party is going to succeed? So I think we have to walk people through that on a regular basis. I'll just say very quickly, I do think we will be able to fight back. And I think that if I didn't believe that, we wouldn't be here. And we have to believe that. People, listen, we have to understand how we're being mentally manipulated by the liberal elite establishment. We're being manipulated. That nothing, it's like nothing bad has ever happened. And that no one has ever accomplished anything in tough circumstances. And I think so much of that is designed to demoralize you, to make you feel they are your only saviors, and that you can only transfer your power to some other individual in the electoral system. But, I made the issue with the abolitionists. I think about this all the time. I think about Harriet Tubman, who not only escaped slavery, but went back multiple times. And people would always say, why don't you just stay? You've done enough. You got 2 or 3 people out. And she never stopped going back. And then when the Civil War broke out, you think, okay, well, maybe, take a rest. You freed hundreds of slaves. Now is the ball's in another court. She said, no, I'm going to go back to the South again so that I can show the black troops how to get into the plantations in South Carolina and free thousands of more slaves. So she wasn't ever going to stop running through swamps, hunted by dogs. So what excuse do we have? But they want you to think that nothing has ever happened under difficult circumstances, so that you give up your own power and you give it over to some billionaire-funded NGO or whoever who's supposed to be a savior. So let's remember, not only can we fight back, we have fought back against the greatest of all odds and defeated the most powerful of all enemies multiple times. The people united will never be defeated. And then I'll just close by saying this. This might not be the 100% the answer to your question, so if I misunderstood it, I apologize. But first and foremost, I think there's another sort of question where you almost answered the question, right? Like, this is the issue. Because the Taylor Law is one. There's many anti-union pieces. It's very difficult to go out on strike, to maintain, to survive. So when we see people organizing, we have to go and support them. We have to stand shoulder to shoulder. We have to help people eat. We have to make sure they can find a way to stay in their home if they have to stay beyond the rent payment and they're not getting paid the check. We have to fight against these laws in a real way and try to repeal them. But we have to create a dense network of individuals so that when anyone else goes into struggle, they know someone else is standing shoulder to shoulder with them, and that they're not going to have to worry about whether they're going to eat if they go out on strike, because we will build a soup kitchen. You know, we have to have that kind of mentality if we're going to succeed. But we have to understand it, and we have to put it in, and I think there's many different aspects to that, but I think it's a great point, and I think it's a critically important point, because the most powerful thing that we have is our labor. Capitalism 100% runs on the backs of all of us. There is nothing they can do. I mean, there's the famous saying, you know, if your boss doesn't show up to work, do you have to not work? But if all of us don't show up to work, can they make money? Exactly. So we have to put ourselves in a position where the types of struggles that we can wage at the point of production, as well as other parts in the street, can be as successful as possible. But I think, again, a lot of the solutions are already in the questions. So if we come together and put all our collective knowledge together, whatever the challenges are, we'll figure out the solutions.
Claudia has something to say, but I want to say one thing first also about this question of how do we convince people who are liberals and who are basically thinking the best possible way to stop Trump is to vote for the Democrats. It seems practical. How do we change people's consciousness? If people are at home watching TV, their consciousness will not change. You know, if you sit home and watch TV or the internet or whatever, you're not going to do anything. You're not going to really be involved. You know, in the Egyptian revolution in 2011, Mubarak turned off the internet so people couldn't watch what was going on in Tahrir Square on Facebook. And so all these young people said, oh, I can't watch it. I have to actually go to the square in order to find out what's going on. And it became a massive event that toppled this dictatorship. So what's the point for us? We have to get people moving. When we say mobilize for January 20th at the White House, I mean in Washington, D.C. on day one of the Trump administration, it's not because we think a demonstration is going to change the situation. What's going to change the situation is a movement, and a movement that's conscious, as I said, and organized. But that won't happen if people are at home. We have to go into the streets right away to show that we have a fighting spirit, that we have mobilization, that we have this history, this rich history of people who didn't back down. So if you want to move your friends, tell them come with you to Washington, D.C. on January 20th. Not because that demonstration is going to change the world, but the movement is going to change the world, but it only happens when people are actually moving. The movement means moving, not sitting, watching, not being spectators, being active people. So that's why we have to build January 20th.
I just wanted to add a little bit in terms of the how. I think the how we're able to walk with people in deepening their consciousness and gaining class consciousness is important. I save all my anger, all my frustration, and all the curse words you could possibly think of for my class enemy, not my people. And our people have been conditioned heavily, violently to aspire and protect ruling class interests. And so we need to walk with our people in a very loving, patient, and dedicated way. And breaking ties with our people are not going to get us to be stronger. So that means that we could engage in a political argument with our brother, with our sister, with our neighbor in terms of what they think, but let us not hit them over the head so hard that we break the bond. And then when that shift happens, we don't have a relationship with them. And then they go into cynicism, which is a thing. They go into isolation, which is a thing in capitalism. And in fact, capitalism thrives of depression, cynicism, isolation. And so we need to do our best to keep our folks, our working class people, despite of the many contradictions that they have, close. Very close. And we have to be that consciousness. And we need to utilize the most ordinary moments as teachable moments. Whether it is watching a movie, whether it is looking at the news together, whether it is reading newspaper articles together and kind of deciphering and decoding what that means, reading between the lines and the things that are not being said. But we cannot build a movement with building cliques of only like-minded people. We need to be out there within the working class, building the consciousness and confidence of people. And that means coming into contact not only with liberal ideology, which is a virus, but the most regressive and retrograde type of ideologies that you could possibly think of. Patriarchy, transphobia, all of these things are embedded, unfortunately, in our working class people. And we have to have the patience to love our people enough to have the faith in our work and in them that they can be transformed. So I really wanted to say that. And I wanted to speak to just briefly also in terms of organizing. Organizing in a context of capitalism teaches us to make compartments out of struggle. You have union organizing here, you have immigrant rights here, you have LGBTQ rights here, you have women's rights here, you have anti-war work here. Everything is kind of compartmentalized. We don't live compartmentalized lives. Those people that are organizing as students are workers. And they are also parents. And they also live in marginalized communities. And so we need to figure out a way in which we build a sense of our class that is broader than that specific struggle that we're in. So if you're doing labor organizing, you need to speak to students. If you're doing student organizing, you need to speak to the folks that are doing tenant organizing in your community. If you are doing immigrant rights work, you need to speak to folks that are doing work around healthcare access. And so our concept of movement needs to be broad, so broad that it actually reflects the necessities of the working class.
All right, well, thank you, everybody. I think this is a perfect note for us to end on, but this ending is actually just an invitation to continue. We have many tasks in front of us, not least organize, join an organization, form an organization. There's many organizations represented on the stage and also in the audience and with everyone online. There's ways you can meet people. And if you don't know where to start, and even if you do, come this Monday and every Monday to the People's Forum. It's packed just like this for our weekly volunteer meeting for the Shut It Down for Palestine movement, where we talk about all of these issues, we discuss them, and we organize ourselves to spread across the city and start changing people's consciousness on a local level. So please come and join us Monday evenings, 6:30 p.m. if you are in the New York area. All right, and before we close, final thing. On the screen behind me, there is a QR code. This will take you to the place where you can sign up for updates about the January 20 mobilization, We Fight Back. It also has a place for you to endorse, so get your organizations to endorse and stay in touch. We're going to start organizing from now, and we need everybody's participation and support. So thank you, everybody. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you in the streets.